All right, everyone, good morning and welcome to my talk. I'm really happy to see you all here today. When I saw that I had a first slot after the party in the morning, I was really fearing that I would be facing an empty hall. Luckily, that's not the case. So my name is Eirik. I work in a consultancy here in Oslo called Beck Consulting, and I'm here to talk to you today about this app that I'm currently working on. So my talk is entitled Rapid App Development with React Native, Lessons Learned at NSB. First off, I guess some of you don't know what NSB is. So NSB is the national train company in Norway. I would like some hands. How many of you commute to work using the trains here in Norway? Not that many angry app users today. That's good. Secondly, how many of you work with mobile apps? A bit more hands, but still a lot of people not working with mobile. That's totally fine. It's not you don't need to have a high skill level in mobile development to understand my talk. So, as I was saying, I'm currently employed at NSB working on this app. And the reason I chose to submit this talk is because for the past year and a half, it's been the most fun year of my career. It's been really rewarding, really tough, really fun. And that's why I would like to condense that story down to a 1-hour talk for you today. So the story is mostly about how we optimized for speed in our team, in the development of an app that has millions of users, that has to work, that people rely on in order to get to work and get home from work, while still enabling us to make new stuff quickly without introducing new bugs. Because I don't know how much you people know about the train reform here in Norway, but until now, all trains in Norway have been operated by this one state-operated company. But now it's supposed to be going into a private sector, and it will be they will face competitors from other countries as well. So NSB will have to compete to keep their business on the existing train lines. So their app needs to be really nice to compete with those, like Deutsche Bahn in Germany. There's a Hong Kong-based company wanting to bid on some Norwegian lines, etc. So the story I'm going to tell is one we in Norwegian call skybillett, which translates to like tickets in the cloud or cloud tickets. And that's one of the largest and most complex projects that I've done in my career. And I'm going to attempt to summarize the most important realizations or learnings or findings that we had in about 9 different bullet points. And those are going to revolve around teamwork, how we work together as a team, and also how we do agile, like development process, methodology, etc. And then lastly, also technology. So this past year and a half, I've learned that there's a difference between small dogs and large dogs. And that's because there's different tickets for those traveling companions on the trains. There's like over 40 centimeters and below 40 centimeters. Different price, different rules. And I've been really learning a lot about how people use apps and their relationships with technology. We get some reviews like this one. This app is slowly like hell. Maybe it's a good idea to change the programmers. 2 stars. And then the next day we get good app, 5 stars. And then we try to learn something from these like 2 words, like what's good about the app? Why do you like it? Or why do you hate it? Why is it slow? So the main character of my story is basically this app, which I guess most of the Norwegians here have used at some point, and maybe you have it on your phone. I think it's one of the most installed apps in the Norwegian App Store. And the cast of the story is a team of 6 people, where I am the tech lead, 4 developers, 1 UX designer, and 1 graphical designer. And both of the designers are part-time. So let me take you back a few years. Sometime in 2010, the development of these apps began. So there's 1 developer working on the iPhone app, there's 1 developer working on the Android app, and there's 1 developer working on the backend. Sometime the next year, these apps are released, and that's a pretty big event in Norway at the time, at least in the digital world. Like buying a ticket digitally in 2011 in Norway was, you would make the front page of VG, Dagens Næringsliv, and other newspapers. And the app looked a bit like this. I even think this is maybe 2.0 or 3.0. This is not from 2011. And today it looks a bit like this. At least some of the parts look like this. So, and these are maybe like 10 iterations later. So you can imagine working on an app with like a just apps in general was totally new in 2010. And then fast forwarding 8 years, you can imagine how it looks behind the scenes. Especially when you have just one person working on each of the apps with no code reviews, no peer programming, etc., etc. So sometime in January 2017, enter me. Like, I want to do a good job. We want to get all these features out. We want to make the commuters happy. We want to remove all the bugs. And then you open Xcode or Android Studio and you just, yikes. So I soon discovered that there's a really large fragmentation. Like, you don't support all the same features on both Android and iOS. The code base is really old because the app is really old. So they build for really old API levels of Android. They target an old iOS version. You can't use the new APIs. You can't use Swift. There's lots of small handbrakes that are on that hinder your development. And it's pretty hard to release new features. I mean, even relatively small tasks would take months, right? And finally, it's really easy to introduce bugs. And in an app where people really rely on you to get to work, you really face people's angers when you introduce a bug. So you really don't want to do that. And also in app world, you can't just ship a new release and have it in production in 10 minutes like you would do on the web. You would have to go through the app store, right? That can take maybe a week. So a critical bug could exist for a week. And that's really disheartening when you're working as a new mobile developer. So I want to tell you about this project that we inherited when I started the project. It was called Project Material Design. And that was about rewriting all the ticketing parts of the app, like where you see your tickets, not where you buy a ticket, but where you can view all your tickets and show them to the inspector on the train. And they were supposed to rewrite that in the new material design style of Google. So we inherited this project that was, well, it's about 60% finished, said the previous developer. So I'm like, OK, 60%, we'll see about that. And I opened the Zeppelin, which we use for sketches. And I see that these are some of the sketches for the feature. So I think this is between 50 and 100 sketches. And this doesn't even entail all of the corner cases, because there's just so many different types of tickets and so many weird corner cases. And then in March, our guy has been working on those last 40% for about months and months and months. And he didn't ask for this project. He just basically got it in his lap. And his morale is just sinking and sinking, and there's no end in sight. So for the people on the project, it's hard to see that something had to be done, but it's so easy for me coming in from the outside, see that maybe we should solve this in a different way. And the reason it was so tough is threefold, basically. So the domain is really complex. I mean, we all say that, but I was really surprised to see that trains and tickets has to be so difficult. I mean, you can buy return tickets, you have one-way tickets, you have season tickets that are 7 days, 30 days, 365 days. You have tickets in Oslo, tickets in Bergen, in Trondheim. They're all different. And then you have with a pet, like above 40 centimeters, below 40 centimeters, with a stroller, the senior citizen, etc. I think you have about 30 different types. And for all of the types, the JSON structure is totally different. I mean, the day of the ticket, the day it's valid, is a different field if it's this ticket or this ticket, right? So the raw data is hard to work with. And there's a large amount of logic in the apps, because the mobile device counts as what we call a ticket carrier. With a physical ticket, you can't just split it in two and then your friend can travel on your ticket, right? But with a phone, you can do the OS restore, and then suddenly you could, if you didn't handle that correctly, have two tickets, right? So we have to make sure that that ticket is only valid in one spot at a time. So there's loads and loads of logic that really just encrypts that ticket so deep into that database on the phone that it's just not possible to reproduce it. And also, of course, the really old Java version, the old Android SDK version, just the legacy is hard to cope with. So the first realization is that when you're making the wrong thing, you would really just need to scope up. I mean, we all talk about the minimum viable product, scoping down, but in this case, it became evident that we had the wrong scope. We had to scope up to solve a problem that would actually help us in the long run. Because let's say we completed that project, material design project. What would we have accomplished? We would, after months and months, have succeeded at creating new ticket pages of the app with new code, and that's good. Maybe reading some bugs, but that would still only be Android. We wouldn't solve iOS. and the raw data that we would have to work with would still be terrible. So a new ticket type, just more difficult work, right? So it was the wrong thing to do, because in the long run, this task didn't help us become faster. So this is basically how it worked. After the train reform in Norway, there's this new company handling all of the tickets, the sales, they own the tickets, and then we're just a distribution channel. So we have our mobile service layer, MTL. That's basically our backend for front-end that talks to these backend systems at the other company. And they serve the tickets to our apps. So what we figured we had to do in order to we asked ourselves, how could this be as easy as possible in the app world? How could we reduce this problem to this simplest possible solvable problem? And we would just sketch up the architecture and we would say, let's say if we, too much fanfare, introduced our own ticket backend system that would just serve as a man-in-the-middle database storing all of the ticket data, and then MTL could just serve them in whatever format we wanted. And then, of course, introduce our own little database over there. So there's several advantages to this upscoping. So we obtain full control of all of the ticket data. You can just format them whatever way you want. You have the same field for the same data for all different types of tickets. And also, in the old system, let's say you buy 5 tickets at once, like one with a dog, one with your grandma, one with your bike, and then one of them is a return ticket as well. And the last one starts one stop earlier than all of the others. Then you will get this large clump of JSON that's called an order. So that's 5 tickets in one, and that's totally different. So in our case, we could just say, let's forget about those orders and just treat every ticket as its own entity. So out with the order concept and just in with single tickets. So much easier to work with. Also, like asking how many period tickets or season tickets do we have active from Drammen to Oslo today? Then we would have to send an email to this other company, hoping they would answer us maybe sometime this week, maybe next week, we're not sure. Now it's just a SQL query, right? You can do that in seconds. We can have that on a board, on a large screen in our, where our team works. So now it's just a query instead of an inquiry. And lastly, this really enables us to write new cool features, because now we know about all the tickets that are sold. We know if this user has a valid ticket for that journey, etc., etc. So let me show you some example features. We could automatically give the customer the best ticket type available. So let's say I take a train to my friend Martin in Asker, and I take a single ticket there, and then I take a single ticket back. And then I take another ticket to visit my mother in Lillestrøm the next day. Then the system can just detect that, it would be cheaper with a 24-hour season ticket. So let me just transform those 3 single tickets for you back into that and refund the extra amount. That's like customers get so happy when we tell them we can do that, right? It's just so, people get so enthusiastic. And also notifying users about expiring season tickets. In the past, we would just hope that it worked because it was someone else's responsibility. But now we could just set up a nightly job at that ticket server and just loop over all of the tickets that are expiring, send them a push message, click here if you want to renew, right? You could transfer tickets between devices. Let's say you have a phone, you drop it in the sea when you go fishing, then you buy a new phone, but your 365-day ticket is in the bottom of the ocean. So you would like to transfer that. In the old days, that would be a manual email to Entur, hope they would fix it, and eventually it will work. Now it's just a single button. We can just transfer my ticket, please. And we can limit that to maybe a couple times a month, so we ensure that people don't use that to fraud, to just share a ticket. But in the future, we might want to introduce a feature where you can buy a slightly more expensive ticket that you can share among your friends or your family members. Now we can do that. And not only can we do that, but the other competitors that might enter the Norwegian train market, they won't be able to do that as easily because they don't have the tickets in their own domain. They have to rely on the tickets they get from the other company. So there's still one challenge that remains. So Skybillett vastly simplifies the development, but there's still this one thing, and that's we have to write the code 2 times. So we need to have some people in the team that really knows their Android, and some people who really knows their iOS. So that means we have 4 developers, so we would roughly have 2 on each platform. So let's say we wanted to fully focus on iOS for a month. We couldn't do that because 2 of our people are Android specialists. So this is maybe the most important thing that we did. Choose the technology that works for you, not against you. I used to work a lot with web, and for those of you who have done that, imagine like React versus jQuery, or jQuery versus the pre-jQuery days, right? Like having different code for each browser. I think that's a good analogy for what we achieved by changing the technology. So what we did, of course, was to try out React Native. And there's so many advantages to that, which I will in turn go through. But first, I wanted to show you how React Native works. How many of you have experience using React or React Native? Hands up. Oh, that's good. Maybe about half. I'll give you a quick run through. So in React, you create components, which are these small nuggets that comprise your UI. Like one thing is one component, or just more components put together, like Lego. And then that component will go into React.js, which is this abstraction layer between your code and the browser. And let's say you change one piece of data in your app. Then React would re-render that big tree of components and see what's the new output. And it would diff that to the old output in the browser. And if you just need to change this one little span, this little text piece, then React would like surgically just go in and change that little piece instead of reinserting all of the new HTML in the DOM. So it calculates what actually needs to be changed. And that's a really pleasant way to work as a developer. I'm sure all of you who have used React agrees that it's a much better way than doing it manually, like with jQuery. So with React Native, you basically use an entirely same algorithm, except that it compiles to native Android and iOS components. So let's say you have a div with a span with some text. That would compile to a view, a native view, and a native UI text field in iOS. So you get native-like behavior and performance. It's not, I mean, if you made a fully native app, it would be slightly better, but it's almost indistinguishable from native when you use React Native. So as with React, you get this tree of components, basically. So I would like to show you a few of the React Native APIs that you can use in your applications to do various stuff that you would need to do in a proper native app. So first off, you just import with JavaScript the components you would need from the React Native standard library, like a view, a text, a touchable opacity, that's just a component that you can actually interact with, and maybe an image. And you would just, almost like with HTML, just put these things together, make components of that, and then reuse your components the way you want. We have components for all of the different button types, all the different image types, all of the lists, etc. We can reuse that like Lego to just, oh, we need a new list. Let's just take this one, glue them together, some glue code, and then we're done. And that usually works fine on both platforms as well. And the styling is really great. You use something pretty resemblant of CSS. So you have margin, padding, color, background color, and best of it all, you have the flex box. When you want things to align, like I want you to take half of the screen, then I want you two to take what's left and split it between you. And then I want that thing to take one half of the vertical space on the screen, and then et cetera, et cetera. You just build up your UIs saying how you want things to align, and they will. And that's just really, really pleasant, especially when you have like 1 million different Android devices, and now also more and more different iOS sizes. I think last time I checked, I think we had about 1,100 different Android models that have our app installed and have communicated with the server at some point. So it says itself, you can't just manually make sure everything works on all of these sizes. You have to have a good system of handling that. And of course, you have auto layout in iOS and something similar in Android, but this is just a breeze to use. Sometimes you actually want to do different things on iOS and Android, and then you can just ask platform, am I iOS? Am I Android? Am I a tablet? And just do the according thing. If you want to alert, you have easy access to the native alert boxes. You don't have to go around creating those yourself. You just alert this, please. And then you can say, do I want one button, 2 buttons, 3 buttons? What would I want to happen when I click them? It's just some JavaScript you just put together. Of course, you want to have access to the native spinners or native loaders to make that look really nice. That's pretty simple. It's just a React component you import. Maybe you want some simple storage, like you have in the browser, just like local storage. There's a key value store that you can save things to. And then you have this thing called async storage that React Native abstracts for you. That's basically goes down to these SQLite, SQL database behind the scenes. Really simple way to just store, did the user click never show this again on this widget? Did the user select, yes, please send me a push notification, etc., etc. Sometimes you need to know, is this an iPhone X? So you can do some queries on the window height and width, and then just present something differently using the dimensions API. Sometimes you need to know, did my app just go into the background? Because then I want to save some stuff to the server. Then you can add some event listeners to the app state API, or you can just query the current state. So we use this a lot, because let's say you are on the train, you show the inspection screen to the conductor or the inspector, and then it says OK, and then you just basically want to close the app and open Facebook or whatever, right? So next time you open the app, you have the validation from yesterday open. So you would need the app to refresh and make sure it gets the latest validation data. So we use this extensively to make sure things happen when we go in and out of the app, and that it works. Sometimes you need to write something in native. I mean, we recently started using silent push, so whenever we get new QR codes from Entur, in sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., we would just push to each device that, hey, there's a new QR code for you. You might want to go get this while your owner sleeps, so when he or she wakes up and takes the train, everything's set, right? So then we would actually need to write that in native, because we can't run the JavaScript code when the app is not running. So then we would need to interact between the JavaScript code and the native code. So there's this thing called the native bridge, where you can write functions in the native layer and expose them in the JavaScript layer. So you have this thing called native modules that exposes all of your files that you have said that this needs to be available in JavaScript. And one of those are our calendar manager, which has this function called add event. So when you enter a ticket, you can say, please add this journey to my calendar. And then you can just add that to your native calendar on the phone. So those are maybe the most important and prominent APIs you would use in React Native. Next, I would like to show you maybe the biggest time saver and one of the biggest loved features of mine from React Native, and that's this thing called hot reloading. It's really popular on the website. Basically, it means that you can just edit your code, save the file, and then those changes would be pushed to your runtime, and everything would just update automatically, right? It's really common on the web side of things these days. You just write your app without ever having to manually refresh the browser. Everything just is pushed through a development web server on the backend side of things, and it just updates. So this together with the Flexbox CSS-like styling, you can just swish, swoosh, this there, this, that, some shadow, blah, blah. And then features just, I can sit and watch one of my teammates, and he can make like a single view in like 20 minutes, fully designed for all screen sizes with padding, with the right fonts, everything, just by using the hot module reloading and the CSS-like styling. It makes us so fast. It's actually so fast that now we mostly prototype our new designs in code and then build that to our apps and then show them to the designers, and then we sit around and just, does this work? That part is fantastic. We need to change this thing. That scrolling didn't work. So instead of just prototyping that in InVision or some design tool, we would just do it in code because it's so fast. And that blew my mind the first day I actually realized that value of React Native. So let's summarize that. React Native removes any language and platform barriers. I mean, of course, we need to still know iOS and Android, Swift, Objective-C, and Java, but we don't all need to know them at an expert level. We can have like one iOS expert in the team, and whenever we quite rarely hit those tasks that are really hard to do, we can call the big guns and get them in. But for most of the development, you just need to know JavaScript. And at least where I work and at our team, everyone knows JavaScript to such a degree that we can get stuff done. And that's so huge. So everyone can pick every task. So let's say the top Android guy goes on vacation like 4 weeks on his cabin in southern Norway. And then, we get a critical Android bug. What do? That used to be a big problem, but now everyone can do everything. And that's so important. Second, it's a really fast way of developing, not just apps, but just the React paradigm with the components, the virtual DOM, the automatically re-rendering, along with the hot reloading. It's just it's really developer gunpowder. It's just, it goes boom, and you create things so fast. And lastly, previously we had to write things 2 times, once for Android, once for iOS. But now we can write it once for both, and then spend maybe the last 10% fixing bugs that only appear on one of the platforms. There are, of course, some things that you would need to manually tweak. It's not like you reduce half of the cost. But I would say maybe we save about 40 or 45% of the total work. And still, that's quite a lot. When you have 4 people working 40-hour weeks over a year, it really accumulates. But of course, it's not all heaven. There are some problems with React Native as well. First off, it's JavaScript. So it can and it will blow up when you don't want it to blow up. So every time we make a major release, we release to just a few %, and you watch carefully in our monitoring tools and see all these crazy kinds of undefined is not a function, and then we start really backtracking through minimized code and then finally find the bug. So that's really a source of pain. But still, it's worth the trade. And this one is not very well documented, because when we set out, everyone writing React Native apps wrote them from scratch. So they went off writing create React Native app, start. And then you have a new app with all of the scaffolding you would need. But we already had this huge app that had lived for 7 years with lots of legacy. So how do we take that first little React Native screen and inject that into our huge app? There was not much documentation on that, so we actually had to spend a lot of time researching this. And now, a year after, we've found solutions to all of the issues we ran into. But it's something to think about if you have a large app, especially when you're navigating between native parts of the app and React Native parts of the app. Because we have like this bottom menu with 5 menu items. Some of them are JavaScript, some of them are still native. So when you jump between them, and especially with the Android back button, you want the navigation to work correctly. So that's a bit of pain. And lastly, you just get more complexity. You have more programming languages, especially JavaScript, which can fail all the time. You need to version your native apps, and the JavaScript bundle that React Native creates differently. So right now, I think we have 9.3.2 of iOS in production, but we have 1.25 of the JavaScript bundle. So when this bug appears, did it appear in which version of the native app and which version of the JavaScript bundle? So you just have more things to think about. But in the end, this was posted yesterday, actually, by one of the leads at the React Native project at Facebook, saying that we're currently working on a large-scale re-architecture of React Native to make the framework more flexible and integrate better with native infrastructure in hybrid JavaScript native apps. So I'm sure this will be addressed in coming releases. And in total, weighing the pros and the cons of React Native, I would say it's totally worth it. I would do it again. But I would just hope that we would find some documentation on the hard parts, and hopefully we will be the ones to write that so we can help you whenever you choose to try out React Native. But just the increased speed by using JavaScript, using the hot module reloading, using the CSS styling scheme, when we have just one part of our new feature, maybe the ticket detail screen, having so many different variants. You can have a trip that's just Oslo, Asker, or you can have Stavanger, Kristiansand, Kristiansand, Oslo, Oslo, Trondheim, Trondheim, Bodø. And then one of those can have a bus for train because there's a dead moose on the railing. And then one of them has like only 2 carriages instead of 4. So we need to display all of that information to the user. And then maybe there are some other things as well, and you just have so many different variants. And just being able to mock that up really quickly along with the designer and say, hey, is this a good way to solve this problem? Yes or no? And you can just do like 3 feedback loops on that in an hour. It really pays off. So in September in 2017, we decided that we wanted to do the big task. We wanted to rewrite it all in React Native, scrap that Android code, and actually write our own new ticket backend. So we chose the big task. It's all set, but how are we going to get it done? Like, how do we do it? We want to know what we want to do, but how? And the only thing that I was certain of in my mind was that we need to just establish this loop, build, measure, learn, and just build this hamster wheel that we were going to run in. We're going to run so many loops. And for every time we complete one loop, we're going to make sure that we do those things that make us run just a little bit faster every time. And I'm sure that as long as we do that, even if we sometimes move in the wrong direction, we will just be moving faster and faster so we can just realign our course. And that leads us to point number 3. because we first scoped up and chose the big boy work. But now we need to scope that thing down to like, what's the smallest possible thing that we can build within those confines that will actually deliver value to the customers. I don't know if you've heard about the skateboard theory. It's one of my favorite images is this one. If you're creating something, especially as a consultant, so there's a client wanting this shiny car, and then you have to explain, instead of just first creating one wheel, and then two wheels, and then two wheels, and the mid body of the car, and then finally add the steering wheel and the engine and all the things you need to have a usable car, meaning that you have something unusable, 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 finally something usable, and hopefully what you wanted to build. You could instead just first build a skateboard. So it's not a car, but you can get around much quicker than you can on foot. And then you can build a skateboard with some steering, so it's safer and faster. Then you can build a bike, a motorbike, and then finally you have the car. But now, if the customer didn't actually want to have a car, you will have a much bigger chance of finding that out during your experiments with the smaller, easier MVPs that you go along the way. So sometimes you just can't choose the skateboard. Just like in our case, we had to do the big work in order to get the thing done. But I like to see it like this. We couldn't make the skateboard, we couldn't make the bike, we couldn't create the motorbike, but we could try to create the smallest possible car, right? We didn't have to create the Rolls Royce or the big truck. We could create a the smallest possible thing. And we have some examples of that. I'm actually quite bad at seeing those smallest possible things we could do, but I have this great teammate who's really awesome at doing that. So we were going to build this thing called push notifications for commuters. So you can say that I take the train every week from Drammen to Oslo, taking the train between 7 and 7:20, and back between 16 and 16:20. So please give me a notification if any of the trains on that line in that time period is delayed or cancelled. So we need a UI for that. So you would set up your favorites, and then you would click on one of them and say, okay, I want for these, I want it to be active for these days, every weekday in this time span. And then I would say, maybe Sunday as well, because some reason. But all of these were new pages. We didn't have them from before. So we said, what if we just don't make the last two? And we just release this thing. So it still has a value to the users because you can see the next 3 departures on your favorite line. So whenever you want to go to work, you can just open this page and just, aha, this is the next one. And then in the next release, we would make this too. But then we actually know, do the users like this? Is it technically feasible? Is it performant? And all of these questions would be answered before we actually create the other stuff. So this is a prime example of just taking out a knife and just slicing out all of the things that you can in order to create the MVP. And we abuse this a lot for the skibilett. So I think over 95% of all journeys are made by one person with one single ticket or one season ticket. There's so few people actually having several tickets at once, or like complex group tickets where you buy a ticket for all of your family with grandma, starting at another station with your dog, etc., etc. So let's just make this one first. And also let's just scope out all of those nice-to-haves and just live without them for like 3 weeks until we can get them done. So you have these shortcuts to buy a zone extension ticket. Let's say you have a ticket that's only valid in Zone 1 in Oslo, in the center of Oslo, and you want to one day take a trip to your grandma, so you would need to Zone 4. So you can just extend that ticket and not buy a full new ticket, but just with the zones you don't have from before. So there's a shortcut for that. And for renewing your season ticket. I mean, people do that once a month. It's not that hard to go back to the menu and just do it the normal way. And also add to calendar, we were a bit unsure. Do people actually use this? Are we going to delay our huge release with that much risk for like a couple of extra days just to make this if you don't know if people use it? So let's just scope it out and then put it back in the next release. And the fun thing was that we actually got a lot of emails on that add to calendar because we removed it. So we actually knew that people were using it, and people were giving us stories about why they were using it and how they were using it. So we could actually build it to accommodate those needs. So number 4, this is one of my favorites. When I started working, I was working a lot with only the front-end side of things. I was creating designs along with the designer. And usually the designer would sketch up something, and then their work would be done. They would just send all the sketches to me in Dropbox, and they would be off on another project. And maybe we didn't even meet because the sketches were done before I started working. So that's I would say, the old way of working. Designers make the sketch, finish them 100%, and then deliver them to the developer. And then the developer basically the developer's job is just to implement exactly what the designer made, right? And then usually the design doesn't accommodate like long account numbers or like long station numbers or things like that. And then you would just basically be the designer yourself because the designer is off at some other project. So I would say design is not a product that you hand off. Design is a process that you have to have continuously in your team. It's just that another type of that loop, right? So the way we do it is that the designer makes the first initial draft, and that's not weeks, that's just a day or maybe half a day. And then we prototype it with the team, and then the first version goes into the hand of one of the team members, and the team just gathers around, and we try it. We point out the good things, the bad things, make new tasks in Trello, our agile board, to fix the things that needs to be fixed, and we just try to do this as many times as possible. So design is just about enabling the designer to do this feedback loop a lot of times within the team, in my opinion. So we had quite a lot of things that needed to be sketched. So this is the list of tickets. These are the ticket detail pages and some other stuff. And there's so many different variants and corner cases. So this was the first draft. This was the second. This was the third. This was the fourth. And there's more, but I just didn't bother just taking any more screenshots and putting them in there. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't make this once and just ship it off and then go to some other project. You just have that designer in your team continuously looking at how it can be improved. And now, after things are in production, the designer still does that, but she doesn't do that on the test version. She does it in production and sees what can still be improved, what are people reporting being not optimal. But the designers aren't used to work like this, so I'm really happy. I love this way of working, but the designers in the beginning, they want to have their full classical design process, the way they learn to work in school, right? Where you have to gather insight, talk with the users, have a long project up front, and then define the goals and the needs of the customer, and then design a solution, and then test that, and then ship that. But here, we're trying to do all of that in just maybe a day or a half a day for each small thing. And that's quite painful, because you're used to having like this several week or month time span in order to make your delivery really good. But now I'm saying, just scrap that, use a day, and then we'll just iterate our way to success. And that was really, we had a lot of pretty tough discussions about that. So I had to realize that the extreme agile version doesn't work, so we need some more time. And then the designers needed to learn that it actually works even without this long design process. We had to meet somewhere in the middle. And some of the reason it was painful is because the designer really felt that if something didn't look quite nice, it was her fault. As long as it worked and was bug-free, the developers had done their job, right? It was the designer's job to make it look good and work good. So that's when I actually realized that, oh, this thing that's not obvious to everyone needs to be said out loud and quite often, is that we're all product developers. Even though I'm a tech person and our designer is a design person and the app manager is more of a business side of person, we're all in it together. We all have a shared responsibility for the thing that we're building. So imagine a band where like the guitarist writes the guitar part and then just ships it off, never looks at the result again, and then the drummer has to add some drums, and then he sends that in Dropbox to the next guy in the line, and then that's how a song is made, right? It doesn't work like that. I mean, some bands make that work, but is that a band, or is that like this guy owns the entire process and then the others just layer the cake, right? Most bands make their stuff by being in a rehearsal room and then just play, they just jam, they just make things organically. And then this guitarist does this crazy thing, and then the other band member just, oh, that's cool, and just tries to build on top of that. And I think that's the way we need to think when we're creating products as well. Who's to blame if there is a bug? Or what if a design ends up being ugly? Or what if the app doesn't perfectly solve the customer demand? I would say that's everyone's fault, right? We can't have a team where the designer feels it's her fault if the design doesn't end up good in the first version. And who will go out to perform the user testing? We go to Oslo S, the main Oslo central station, a couple of times a month to test our new stuff. And we don't send the UX person only. We send the entire team because, a little bit because we're so close by, it takes 5 minutes to walk, but the entire team has so much fun actually seeing that, oh, they actually find my button, they click my button, it works. Or that, oh, this thing didn't work so well. I mean, that motivation that you get when you see that the thing you made and designed didn't work that well turns into motivation to get it to work better. But let's say that UX person comes home and creates a large report, and then you, okay, you don't really feel it, right? So I would say everyone needs to go out and do the user testing. And that brings us to one of my OCDs. We used to sit like this. So we had people sitting around this 6-person table. And then we tried this experiment where we moved the tables to sit like this. And the change was quite dramatic. Here, let's say this person needs to talk to this person, but it's not super important. It's like they could use talking to that other person. It's so much easier to just go into Slack or some communication tool to do that. But now, we just turn around and talk for like the smallest possible thing. And it really stimulates the way we collaborate, and it really helps build this feedback loop, where we several times a day build something, test it together, discuss options, and then go back into crunch mode. Another detail, we used to sit like this with all of the developers, and one of the developers was from another team, or the back-end team. And then we tried this subtle difference. We took the designer and just put her in the middle of the developers. And that really took us a long way from the design as a product way of thinking into the design is a process way of thinking. Because then we started to have these daily sit-downs where we talked about design, instead of having like weekly or bi-weekly design critiques where we finally are shown the new design, right? Suddenly the back-end guys say that, oh, I love this design, but it's not possible because we don't have that data available. And then it's better to learn that in like 3 hours instead of 2 weeks, right? Also, we use Slack, as I guess most other teams does, but we also use Zeppelin for our sketches. And once we made integration from Zeppelin to Slack, so whenever the designer updates one of the slides, it would show up in our channel. Then everyone in the team would see whenever something changes, and then we could basically start a discussion on that. So you see the app manager would just say, I like this, could we change this text to this text? And then, voila, it's changed after 2 minutes in the sketches. So that's that part. And I would like to talk a little bit about how we use our agile boards. Because most of my career, the agile boards have been something that didn't give me much. I didn't want to look at them. They've been large, lots of cards I don't know what represents. They might be outdated. And basically, I didn't feel like it was a help in our work. And the stand-ups as well were these long, way too long meetings where we went through lots of tasks that people didn't know what meant and weren't supposed to be done until a long time. So I started taking the role of being the Trello Nazi. So what to do if a task isn't supposed to be done for at least not the next release? I would just say, delete it. If it's important, it will surface, right? Or you could just put it in another list on another board, wherever. But I would say just get rid of it. What if nobody knows what a card is about? Then it needs a new place to live, not in your board. It just needs to be somewhere else, because if the person who made it isn't there and can't talk about it, it probably isn't important. And what if a card has a bad description? Make it make sense as fast as possible. When you see a card on your board in your stand-up and nobody knows what it is, or maybe just one person knows what it is, then talk about it, because then everyone in the team will feel some sort of ownership. And what about whenever a list contains more work than what needs to be done for the next release? And I would just make a new list out with a knife, just cut it in two, make like priority for this and that date for the next release, and then another list with whatever's left, or maybe just throw it out. Make sure that whenever a team member looks at the list, it should represent where you are and where you are heading. People should look at it and say, ah, this list makes sense. This is what we need to get done by next Friday. And this task, I'm not going to do it because my friend does it much quicker than me, but I know what it's about because it has a good name, and we've talked about it at the stand-ups. So Trello is actually a help for us. It's an aid. It's not like a crutch, or worse, it's not a hindrance. And I've been in so many teams where we could just throw out Trello or Jira or whatever because it doesn't give you anything. So these are some of the principles that we worked after. We iterate, we learned, we produce, but then we reach a point where we have so much work done, but when will we actually be done, right? So that's when we needed to sit down and just have this, what we call krigsråd in Norwegian, or I'll translate it to just a war council. We had to sit down and see what are we going to do and when. We basically tried to answer these questions. What are we working on right now? Like which tasks, exactly what needs to be done? What's the scope? And that list should exist in Trello with actually just those cards. How much of that does it need to contain this next thing that we're doing, the next release? Are some of these cards not essential? Could we postpone them to the next release? And when can we have this smallest possible thing that will actually wow the users finished? Like next week, next month, 3 months? As long as it's shorter than 3 months, you should just set a date. Just set a date. It doesn't need to be exactly, it doesn't need to be that committing, but you need to have a date that you should try to work for, because it totally changes your mindset. You start looking at all of the tasks in a new light, instead of just going by, doing some work, showing at work, going home, day after day. You're actually thinking, can we do this work done by that date? And that gives you a sense of urgency that can be so fun as a team to see if you can actually get it done. So we were saying that, okay, November 13th, we should have our new ticket backend in production, doing only 1% of all network calls through that new service, just to see if it works. A week later, our backend should be scaled to 100%. So all new tickets being sold should also be stored in our database. And then the day after, we should have the app in production. And let's start with Android, because there's no review, so we can just ship it whenever we want. And we should ship the app only to 1%, because there's a high-risk thing going on here. It's a big boom release. Lots of things could fail. And then let's try to tenfold that in 2 days, as long as there's no critical bugs that we can fix. And then by a week before Christmas holiday, we should be scaling up, really scaling up. And then we should be all done at least by December 22nd, because we want to have a Christmas holiday. And we were just, the day before this meeting, everyone was kind of happy. We were working kind of like fat and happy, right? You're content, you're not stressed, you're just minding your daily business. But then after this meeting, everyone had this kind of joyous, semi-nervous, can we actually get it done? And how cool would it be to be finished by this date? To get home to Christmas and say, Mom and Dad, I've actually helped do the biggest technical lift in this app since forever. And then Helmut von Moltke once said that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And at this point, we suddenly realized that there's an awful lot of things that can go wrong with this thing we're trying to do. And then our most senior teammate, who is really all about shipping early and just failing fast and handling that, helped us to realize that don't be afraid of making mistakes. The worst thing we can do is to make a mistake and don't discover and fix it quickly. And the second most worst thing you can do is to be afraid of doing mistakes. So, but how does fixing things quickly actually work in an app world, where at least on the iOS side you have a week's delay, or could have a week's delay? These past months it's been just 1 day, but still. So our solution is to ship to Android first, because then you can ship a new release whenever you want. And you have full control if you want to release the 1%, 10%, 100%, it's your call. And also, you need to have some feedback from your users. So those 1% or 10% can actually tell you if something doesn't work. So we were considering using Intercom, which is this really great feedback tool. Or it's more than that, but we wanted to use it for that. But the problem is this little thing that when you send a message, they typically reply within, and we basically don't have the capacity to do that. We just want your feedback, say, thank you for sending it to us. We won't have the time to reply to you, I'm sorry. but the intercom would just always do that, even if we never answered anyone, so that didn't work. So we were thinking, what's the simplest possible thing that we could do that would work? So we could just add a small link, and then just a mail to. Really old school, right? Nobody is impressed with that. But it really works. We got 1,500 emails in just a few weeks, and it's still on there. And I think now we're in the tens of thousands of feedbacks. We're just shipping that into a Trello board, where we're aggregating up all of the most wanted features. And whenever there's actual bug, we just handle that directly, and we just move the card into our day-to-day board, and just fix it, release it. And it's a bit of a manual process. We will change this into a more of a enterprisey, large-scale feedback system with time, but it's actually working really well, even for one of the most used apps in Norway. So that's quite some food for thought. So that's the active part, where users actually tell you, hey, this new thing is cool, this thing doesn't work. But we also need to try to be preemptive and see things that doesn't work from before. So number 8, make sure nothing happens in production without you knowing about it. And you'll sleep way, way better. Actually, that very senior backend guy who took care of most of the ticket backend service, whenever he was stressed, I would be stressed, because if he has full control, then I know everything will be fine. And towards the end of the project, when he started saying that everything's fine, this will work out, then my shoulders just sank 20 centimeters. And he is the expert at this thing. So we set up all of our cloud-based monitoring in Amazon Web Services. So I would basically, for every release, just do a search for error and that app version, and as long as it's empty, that's good. I would sleep way better. And also do active monitoring of stuff that we wouldn't want to fail, like we want the app to wake up in the night and get you the new validation data for today's ticket if you're a commuter or have a season ticket. So if that doesn't happen, let's say you don't open the app until you're in a tunnel and there's no service. That's a problem. So we would, of course, monitor how many percent of the season ticket holders would actually get those new tickets during the night. It turns out not enough, so that's why we now rebuilt that from being a random, the app wakes up, checks if there's something new, to us actually pushing to the device, making sure that it will work. And also checking that the OS clock on the device is the same as our clock, so people aren't trying to change the clock to get their season ticket that expired yesterday to be valid today, because today is yesterday. You get the picture. So we have just boards and boards and boards. So whenever we ship a new version, you can actually see, as soon as new users are onboarded, you can see, you get the feeling if it's working or not. But then there's also always that thing that you miss. So it's possible to log in. You usually log in from the profile page, but sometimes you can log in while you're buying something. It's a nice way of letting new users find their ticket, almost buy it, and then, by the way, you need to make an account. OK, and then you buy the ticket. But when you log in through here, your user ID isn't set where it should be set in our new system, which means that we would get an API call to users/empty/tickets, meaning that there would, of course, be no tickets there because we don't know your identity. So that was, of course, we had I think it's quite the elegant solution to that, because we would just reply you with a fake ticket. That's basically where we just put data into the fields that would normally say Oslo, Drammen, 30 days, active, etc. We would just say, this is not a ticket. There's a problem. You need to go to the profile page and log in, and then everything will be fine. So we basically just sent those people that weren't logged in a fake ticket saying, if you think you should have a ticket, but there's not one here, then go here and do this. So even if you don't have a solution for this in the app side, you can also always just fake it till you make it by sending the app just wrongful information to tell people how to solve their problem. And lastly, there's another corner case that we missed. Let's say you buy a ticket anonymously on the web page. You download that onto the app using the reference code or the hentekode. And then you update the app to the new version, because then we wipe the database on the phone and you move all the tickets to the cloud. So suddenly there's no evidence of that ticket anywhere, because you bought it anonymously and you downloaded it to the app without being logged in. And then you deleted the app implicitly because you upgraded to the new version. So the only reference we had of that ticket was the log entry in the backend system of you actually using the pickup code or the reference code. So you would actually have to call customer support. So that happened to about 1,000 users. So it sucks, but still, it's not the worst thing that could have happened when 6 people work a lot for 5 months doing the biggest possible technical improvement that you could do in the app. So things will fail, but it's okay. So when the time has come, you need to do the big boom, how to get that new update safely out to all of the users. We started with just 1% on Android, and then we learned that that's just way too defensively. Let's say that could be maybe a couple of thousand people. So what are the chances that just those people actually have a ticket that day and open a ticket, open their app actually on that day? Almost none did. So we just had to ramp it up pretty quickly, 5%. Then you see the numbers start going up. We released to the iOS closed beta tester group. And then we actually sent iOS to review, because at this time, we're about December 1st, and time is ticking if you want to get this done before Christmas. And we get a bit bold. We see that the small bugs that we have, we fix them, ship a new version to 30% on Android, and you see immediately things spike up. And then what shouldn't happen happens. So Cupertino in California says that your app has a bug, so you can't release it. And it didn't, but they used the app without Wi-Fi or without internet coverage, and the app doesn't work without internet. So, and that's okay as per Apple guidelines, and it was clearly stated, but the app review person just did a mistake, and just opening like a discussion with Apple, that's just a week or 2 before getting a response, at least in our experience. So you just have to ship a new app, this exact same binary, and that one was accepted. So that just shows you can't always trust Apple. Then we start what's called an iOS staged release. That's 1%, 2%, 5%, 10, 20, 50, 100. For each day, it bumps up 1 level. iOS starts shipping, then you're suddenly here at 100%. But still, this is quite a small number compared to all of the people with the app. So you see there's quite a lot of people not using automatic updates. And then people go home for Christmas. You see these big jumps every day. People in the morning open their app, going home for Christmas. And then Christmas ends, and still it's going slightly up. So this is a graph of people using a pre-shibboleth version and the post-shibboleth version. So I say I'm running out of time, so I'll just jump a bit here. So by 14th of December, we were actually out to 100% on both platforms. Things are working. The only bugs we found were minor things that we could actually fix before we released on iOS. So what we achieved with this, we now own all of the ticket data on our side. We got rid of loads of technical debt. We had new ticket design on both apps, not just one. We were able to actually battle test React Native and discover that, yes, we actually want to move forward with this. And we managed to avoid the front page news. And that's actually something that could have happened. That's happened several times in the past, especially when something regarding permissions on Android happens, because then people get really mad. Even if you ask for this small thing, it will, on some operating systems, be blown up to people thinking we want to have access to their entire file system, which of course we don't. And then vg.no front page. But about this way of working, I know that everyone on the team has said in various happenings that this was the most fun project they've ever been a part of. So this way of working is really fun, but it's also truly demanding to pull it off. So it takes some time to get that hamster wheel working, but it's also really effective and rewarding. And the most important takeaways for me: figure out how to get every person on the team like super involved, get them to really love the product and really feel ownership in no matter the way you need to do. So remove friction. Make sure your agile board isn't a mess. Make sure the seating is enabling collaboration, that your stand-ups are actually helpful, and spend that time on those little things. Don't just code, but actually try to help your team get stuff done. And make sure you use the technology that's pleasant to use and actually helps you build speed. I've used jQuery, I've used React. I would prefer React. I've used native technology, and I've used React Native. I would prefer React Native. I'm not saying that always goes, but some technology is better for your team than some other technology, and make sure you have you think about that. Lastly, build a really tight feedback loop with your team, both through explicit feedback from the users using analytics, Google Analytics, statistics, monitoring from your cloud, If something not right, make sure you are the first person to know. So I think this image illustrates really those 4 months for us. I really hope that I've inspired you in some way to change the way you work, maybe try out React Native. If there's any questions, we could do that up here. I don't want to spend everyone's time by doing that up here. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great day at NSB.